Hey guys, Ryan Sprague here, host of Somewhere in the Skies, and I just wanted to let you know about an awesome event that I'm going to be partaking in on June 28th and June 29th. Small Town Monsters presents Monsterfest 2. The event takes place in downtown Canton, Ohio. Backed by popular demand, Monsterfest 2 will include Small Town Monsters panels, Q&As with guests, Small Town Monsters film premieres, meet and greets with people like me and other authors, other podcasters, and so much more. And if you have kids under the age of 12, they get in for free. So I hope you'll join me and so many others at Monsterfest 2, taking place June 28th and June 29th in Canton, Ohio. To learn more and to get your tickets, visit smalltownmonsters.com. Again, that's smalltownmonsters.com. And I'll see you at Monsterfest 2. In the mid-1970s, in the Hadhramaut region of the Middle East, 3 men witnessed 3 strange glowing objects moving across the sky, heading into the desert valley. They would immediately follow the strange object on camel, eventually tracking them into a valley accessed only by steep steps carved into the mountains that surrounded it. To their amazement, below them were signs that whatever the object was, it had landed in the valley for reasons unknown.
This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Hadhramaut is a geographic region in the Middle East that takes its parts in Yemen, Oman, and Saudi Arabia. And on February 8th, 1974, it was the location of an apparent UFO landing. The events were witnessed from the Yemen territory of the region of Al-Makalla when, during the early evening of the night in question, approximately between 6:50 p.m. and 7:50 p.m., Mullah Umar Sadiq, a priest at a local mosque, and his friends Ibrahim Kalib, a merchant, and Muhammad Watif, a physician, were standing on the roof of the mosque looking up at the late evening sky. They were facing the east, with the sun setting behind them and the first of the stars becoming visible in the darkening skies. However, moments later, each of the men looked on in absolute shock as they witnessed 3 large white discs coming into view. What's more, these anomalous objects were descending slowly toward the ground. While all 3 men agreed that the objects were likely some kind of space capsule, they thought they were most likely some kind of experimental aircraft of the United States or the Soviet Union. Captivated, the men gathered together some provisions, and getting on 3 camels, they headed in the direction that the strange objects were traveling in. They estimated the objects were somewhere in the direction of the Wadi Yawlan, a largely uninhabited valley around 30 miles to the east of their location. It would be a long journey, several hours in total, over, at times, rocky, hilly terrain. And it wasn't lost on Watif that between them they had a medical expert, a practical man of affairs, and a holy man. Quite the diverse group should they encounter the pilots of these strange white discs. As dawn approached, the 3 men dismounted from their camels in order to partake in the morning prayer. It was as they were concluding that they saw a vivid glow that lit up the whole eastern sky. The men later recalled that although the sun was not yet above the horizon, the whole of the southeastern sky above the Wadi Yawlan was, for a few seconds, lit up and became as bright as the noonday. Then, the already strange events turned even stranger. The three men recalled that a yellowish white light in 3 beams came from the top of each object. These lights were stabbing and fanning out into the sky. After several moments, the brightness of the light faded, but the 3 beams remained visible. The men continued to watch this display as the beams of the light began to grow paler and thinner, eventually becoming lost in the light of dawn. Undeterred by these strange events, the men packed up their belongings and set out on camel once more, heading toward the Wadi Yawlan. And when they finally arrived several hours later, they would find evidence that something very strange had happened there. The Valley of the Wadi is a triangular shape, with one perimeter measuring approximately just over a mile, with the other 2 being around 3 miles each. Steep hills surround the valley on all sides, and it's accessible only by a very steep and very narrow flight of steps cut out of the rock face. The only realistic way to enter the valley would be on foot, with no place suitable for any wheeled or caterpillar-tracked vehicle to do so. Investigators later pointed out that there is a small opening in the mountains and hills, which form the perimeters of the valley, which leads out to the sea. However, this opening is so beset with rocks and reef that no boat could possibly get through. Ultimately, no vehicle or craft could possibly have gotten into the Wadi Yawlan, unless it was by air. And even then, most normal aircraft would have been unable to land there due to the rocky terrain of the valley floor. In fact, the only prosaic vehicle that possibly could have done this could be a helicopter or a spacecraft. Mullah Umar Sadiq would take investigative journalist Wolfgang Appel to the location of the apparent landing site 10 days after the incident, so he could see for himself just exactly what they had witnessed. And what he saw was nothing less than staggering. Appel would state that impressed in the sand were tracks from some sort of caterpillar-like vehicle, and that whatever made the tracks had to have had a considerable weight to them due to the sheer depth of them, as well as the fact that these vehicles had seemingly crushed volcanic rock into dust. As Appel looked around the valley, he contemplated increasingly just what vehicles had made these tracks and why. Even if they had somehow gained entry into the valley, there were no known tanks or tractors in the immediate area. And with that in mind, Appel asked just why a foreign helicopter would have brought any sort of caterpillar-tracked vehicle and set it down precisely in the wilderness of Wadi Yawlan. It was, though, as Appel continued to scan the track marks in the valley, that he and Sadiq made what was perhaps the most startling discovery. On the valley floor, they could make out 3 deep indentations, each around 300 feet apart, and in the distinct shape of a triangle, almost as if something very heavy with a triangular-shaped base had landed in the valley. And if that was the case, it would seem that the track markings were the result of some kind of ground vehicle that had almost certainly been deployed from the mystery object. Even stranger, in the middle of these triangular perimeters, they could see rock that had been fused and melted, suggesting that it had been subject to some kind of intense heat. They also saw further evidence of intense heat around the edges of the triangle, where some of the surrounding vegetation had clearly been singed and burnt. Appel would spend 3 full days in the area, making a painstaking examination, in the hopes that he might recover one small piece of the object, or perhaps one of the ground vehicles that had seemingly been conducting some kind of survey of the land. However, despite his efforts, he found nothing of the sort. The incident in the Hadhramaut region is indeed intriguing. Just what might those 3 objects have been that the 3 men witnessed? Could they have been vehicles from another world? Or Could they have been some kind of top-secret military aircraft? Perhaps more than anything, what was the purpose of the landing? Did the possible occupants of these craft have to carry out some kind of repairs? Indeed, perhaps this is why they opted for such a remote and largely inaccessible location in the first place. That something very real was witnessed that evening in 1974 is surely without question. Not least because of the physical evidence seemingly left behind in the valley, as well as the fact that the 3 witnesses were found to be extremely credible, with no apparent motive for any sort of falsehoods. The Hadhramaut region sighting remains a complete mystery over half a century later. It is, though, far from the only strange encounter with a mysterious aerial object in the Middle East. Hey everyone, Ryan Sprague here, host of Somewhere in the Skies. If you've ever thought about supporting us, we have great 2 easy options for you right now. If you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, you can click the subscribe button at the top of your Apple feed. Or you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/somewhereskies. Both of these options give you the same benefits. Early access to the main show, bonus episodes and content, and priority to ask our guests your listener questions. So, to help support Somewhere in the Skies, click that subscribe button on Apple or visit patreon.com/somewhereskies. Thank you so much for your support, and keep looking up. According to a report titled UFO over Lebanon in the January 1973 edition of the Ephemeral Bulletin, on the evening of August 4th, 1972, an art professor, Walter Hamidi, was visiting his uncle's house in Shemlin, which overlooked Beirut Airport. It was around dusk when Walter, his wife Mary, as well as his aunt, were pulling into the driveway of their house. Almost immediately, his cousins ran towards the car, exclaiming they had just seen a flying saucer. His cousin later stated that he and his wife were sitting outside on the terrace looking up at the early evening sky when all the power at the property suddenly cut out. They looked around and could see other people's properties around the village still had power, and realized the only property that appeared to be affected was theirs. To begin with, they simply sat and waited for the power to return, as power outages were not at all uncommon in the area. However, after several moments, the cousin's wife drew his attention to a beautiful red star that she at first thought could be Mars. Then, as they continued to watch what they thought was the red planet, a distinct puff of black smoke was emitted from it, making them realize they were watching something a lot more out of the ordinary. Following this, the object began to move, heading in a southwesterly direction. At this point, the cousin went to obtain his binoculars, and by the time he had returned to the terrace, he could see Walter pulling his car onto the driveway. A short time after Walter had arrived at the house, the power returned. The group continued sitting outside on the terrace, enjoying the warm weather and cooled by the breeze from the mountains. But at some point during the evening, they ventured over to the railing at the edge of the yard to look out over the town of Deir al-Qamar, which was beautifully and brightly lit due to a celebration taking place. Eventually, they turned their attention skyward and began pointing out constellations. As they were highlighting the Big Dipper, Mary suddenly noticed a glowing red star-like object moving around it. She quickly alerted the others as to what she was seeing, and those who had binoculars immediately used them to focus on the constellation, and more specifically, the moving red object. Walter would also view the object through the binoculars, later describing it as looking like, quote, 2 saucers placed on top of one another, and that a, quote, perpendicular plane of windows that went all the way around could be seen in the object. He would also say that the top of the craft had a slight domed appearance, and that a similar light to the light shining out from the windows was all along the side. All recalled that there was no noise from the object, nor were there any visible means of propulsion. They continued to watch for several minutes as the object maintained a steady pace, approximately the same speed as a propeller aircraft. It eventually disappeared into the distance and remains a complete mystery today, over half a century later. According to a report by Shimon Rosenberg, on the evening of July 3rd, 2005, at just before 10 p.m., close to the Israeli-Lebanese border, something was witnessed and filmed by the local resident on the Israeli side of the border. To begin with, when he first noticed the aerial anomaly, Rosenberg stated that a tree partially blocked his view of the object, and so he wasn't at first able to film it. However, at around 10:15 p.m., the star-like object appeared once more, moving directly over Rosenberg's neighborhood. As he began to film it, the object came to a temporary halt, allowing him to zoom in on it for several moments before it began moving once more, heading toward the north. The object eventually disappeared behind a building, and while Rosenberg did manage to view it again after working around the building and getting back into his sights, it was now beginning to pick up pace, eventually disappearing into the distance. Unfortunately, the footage doesn't appear to be available anywhere online for the time being. In the same year, several months earlier, at around 9:15 p.m. on April 5th, 2005, somewhere in urban Israel, a resident was returning back to their house after taking out the trash when they noticed a bright red light overhead. It was completely stationary at first, so the witness did their best to ignore it. However, when it began moving, they realized that they were witnessing something completely out of the ordinary. The more the witness focused on the object, the more they could tell the object was disc-shaped and flashed blue, orange, and red lights. They also estimated that while in view, the object was barely 100 feet above the ground. The following year, on the evening of June 6, 2006, according to a report in the Israeli publication Maariv, truly strange events unfolded in the Knesset, Israel's House of Parliament. On various occasions during the evening, witnesses claimed that a luminous white body or figure appeared near the building and strolled around the main court for several minutes. It soon became apparent that many people had witnessed this strange glowing figure, with some people even claiming to have seen the figure during the daylight hours inside the Legislative Assembly, while others claimed they saw it approaching the building from the direction of a nearby cave near an old cemetery. Most of the sightings, though, appeared later in the evening, with one coming from a security guard who claimed to have seen a, quote, shiny white cloud enter the Parliament building at around 2 a.m., which then assumed the shape of a body and proceeded to stroll along the court. The event, while strange, took an even stranger turn in the days and months that followed, when rumors of the security camera footage were not only denied, but it was officially claimed that nothing at all untoward had happened at all. Then, things took a further twist when the chief of security at the Parliament building ordered film experts to analyze recent security footage. It would seem clear that whatever happened that evening, not only were the authorities aware of it, but they were actively covering up the events. Another strange sighting in 2004 occurred in Tel Aviv. At just before 10 p.m., a local resident and their partner were on the patio of their 12th-story apartment when they became aware of two strange lights that appeared to be hovering around 2,000 feet above Jaffa Port, around 3 miles away. To begin with, the pair believed the object were helicopters. However, they noticed that the lights had a strange blue and pink glow to it. Furthermore, it wasn't moving at all, but was completely still. Then, it dimmed and disappeared. A short time later, though, 2 more lights appeared, one now much higher than the other. These lights too disappeared. On the afternoon of August 20th, 2003, at around 1:45 p.m., in a rural part of northern Iran near the Caspian Sea, 2 cousins were driving from the small town of Chalus to Shah Savar, with the sea on one side of them and the forest on the other. As they were driving, they noticed 2 strong white lights just short of 1,000 feet in the air. The lights were moving very slowly to the left and to the right, up and down, in a controlled and purposeful manner. The witnesses estimated the lights were just over a mile away from them, and were between 15 to 30 feet across. The lights remained in view for around 20 seconds before disappearing behind the trees at the roadside. Several years later, at around 9 p.m. on June 18th, 2007, in Almeria, Baghdad, in Iraq, a local resident reported seeing a glowing white triangular shape appear suddenly in the sky. It remained visible for several seconds before vanishing into thin air. Whatever it was, it remained completely still and silent while visible, and also remains a mystery. There have been countless UFO encounters that have unfolded in the Middle East. And on top of that are many, many sightings during the Gulf Wars. And there's even the famous Tehran UFO incident, which we covered extensively in an exclusive episode in the archives. And UFO sightings throughout the Middle East continue up until today. With its long, long history stretching back to the start of known civilization, could this be a factor as to why so many UFOs have allegedly visited the Middle East? We can only hope that any further sightings are not only documented, but perhaps some answers even brought forward as to what is happening somewhere in our skies. This episode was researched by Marcus Loth. To learn more, visit ufoinsight.com. You can follow us on Twitter @SomewhereSkies and on Instagram @SomewhereSkiesPod. Please take a moment to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It truly does help us gain visibility and find new listeners. A special thanks to our podcast networks, eOne and LIONSGATE Sound. And a special thanks to you as well for listening. Remember, keep your feet on the ground, but never stop searching somewhere in the skies.
Somewhere in the Skies is produced by Third Kind Productions in association with the Entertainment One Podcast Network.